One decision, one president, and the whole world felt it. What happens when trade rules change overnight? Hey there, English learners. Are you ready for a powerful and eye-opening story? Today's story will take you on a journey through world trade, taxes, business decisions, and how one big change can affect people everywhere, from presidents and company leaders to small business owners and everyday shoppers like you and me. We'll explore what tariffs are, why governments use them, and how they change the economy. You'll hear how businesses reacted, how countries responded, and what it means for regular people try to live their lives. This is more than a lesson. It's an adventure into real-world English that helps you learn through a story filled with emotion, action, and clear explanations. So grab a notebook if you like, get comfortable, and let's begin. And don't forget, subscribe to our channel, hit the like button if you enjoy the story, and share it with your friends who are also learning English. Your support means the world. Let's dive in. The big announcement. It was a bright, crisp morning in Washington, D.C. The air outside the White House felt tense but energetic. Flags fluttered in the breeze, and reporters gathered, cameras ready. A podium stood in front of the familiar white columns, and an announcement was expected, something big. Inside the White House, President Donald Trump stepped up to the microphone with a confident expression. "Today," he began, "marks a new beginning for American trade. Today is Liberation Day." The crowd of journalists leaned in. The phrase was unusual, dramatic. The president explained that the United States would be changing the way it does business with the rest of the world. The government was about to introduce new rules about trade, and at the center of these rules was something called a tariff. In simple terms, a tariff is a special kind of tax on goods that come into a country from abroad. For example, if a toy is made in another country and shipped to America to be sold in stores, the U.S. government could add a tax to that toy when it arrives. This makes it more expensive to buy. That day, President Trump announced that all imported goods, from clothes and electronics to furniture and vehicles, would be affected. A baseline tariff of 10% would apply to nearly everything entering the country. But that was only the beginning. "We're also introducing something new," he continued. "Reciprocal tariffs. If a country puts high taxes on our goods, we'll put high taxes on theirs." This statement sent a wave of reaction across the press room. Everyone understood that this policy could change the way the world trades with America, and it could also change prices, businesses, and everyday life. As he stepped away from the podium, the president's words echoed through the nation, and soon through the world. It was a declaration of economic change, one that would be felt by companies, governments, and even families shopping for groceries or school supplies. The story had just begun. What is a tariff? Imagine walking into a store and picking up a pair of headphones. You check the label and notice they were made in another country, let's say Japan. What you don't see is that by the time those headphones reach the shelf, they had passed through several steps, one of which may have added an invisible cost, a tariff. So, what exactly is a tariff? A tariff is a tax placed on goods that are imported into a country from another one. It's not like the sales tax you pay at the register. It's applied when the goods enter the country. The goal is to make imported items more expensive than local ones. Let's say the United States places a 10% tariff on bicycles made in Italy. If a bike costs $100, then an extra $10 is added when it arrives in the U.S., making the price $110 before it even reaches the store. This extra money goes to the government, not the seller. There are different types of tariffs, and the United States had just introduced two of them. 1. Baseline tariff. This is a general rule. A flat 10% tax on goods from nearly every country. It acts as a starting point, applying to a wide range of products, electronics, food, clothing, tools, and more. 2. Reciprocal tariffs. These are more specific. The U.S. looks at how other countries treat American goods. If another country charges high tariffs on U.S. products, the U.S. responds with equally high tariffs. The word reciprocal means giving back the same treatment. It's like saying, if you tax our apples at 30%, we'll tax your oranges at 30% too. That's how some countries like China, Vietnam, and Japan ended up with much higher tariffs than others. For example, product from China would now face a total tax of 34%, and goods from Vietnam would be taxed at 46%. But what about countries like Canada and Mexico? They were treated differently because they are part of a special agreement with the U.S. called the USMCA, a trade deal that already sets clear rules between the three countries. Thanks to that, they would not be affected by the new 10% or reciprocal tariffs. These new rules sparked many questions. Who really pays the tariff? Does it hurt the country sending the goods or the people buying them? Here's the truth. Businesses importing goods usually pay the tariff first. But in the end, they often raise their prices to cover that cost. That means consumers, everyday shoppers, end up paying more. And while some leaders may say the foreign countries pay the tariffs, many economists believe the real burden falls on people and businesses inside the country that created the tariff. Tariffs have been used throughout history. They've been a tool to raise money, protect local jobs, and influence international trade. But they also come with risks, higher prices, possible job losses, and trade conflicts. The United States was now betting that this old tool could bring new benefits. But not everyone agreed. How the new rules work. The day after the announcement, newspapers across the country ran bold headlines. 10% tariff hits global trade, and America strikes back with reciprocal taxes. In offices, homes, and factories, people were trying to understand exactly what these new rules meant. At the heart of the plan was a 10% baseline tariff. This meant that almost every product brought into the United States from abroad would now cost more. Whether it was shoes from Italy, phones from South Korea, or tea from India, all would face this basic import tax. But that was just the beginning. The more complex and more controversial part of the plan was the reciprocal tariffs. These were extra taxes added on top of the 10% for certain countries. But not just any countries, only those that, according to the U.S. government, have been unfair to American exports. Take China as an example. China already had high taxes and strict rules for American companies trying to sell goods there. So, under the new system, the U.S. responded by adding more tariffs to Chinese goods coming into America. The result? A total tariff rate of 34% on Chinese imports. Vietnam, a fast-growing trading partner, was hit even harder. The U.S. set the rate at 46%, a massive increase that shocked businesses that relied on Vietnamese products. Other countries, including Japan and members of the European Union, also faced higher tariffs. Why such steep numbers? The government explained it like this: if your country taxes our goods at 25%, we'll do the same, or more. It was a direct, aggressive approach. The message was clear: we want fair trade, not one-sided deals. But not every country was punished. Two of America's closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico, were completely exempt from the new tariffs. That's because of a trade agreement called the USMCA, a deal signed by the three countries to manage trade between them. Under this deal, they already had agreed-upon rules. So, the U.S. decided not to change anything for them, at least for now. For businesses, this created a new world of numbers and calculations. A shipment from Canada? No problem. A shipment from China? Add 34%. Every order, every supply chain decision now needed to be reviewed, repriced, or even rerouted. Retailers wondered how to handle the price increases. Should they charge more? Offer fewer discounts? Delay product launches? Manufacturers that relied on foreign parts faced even tougher choices. A car company using steel from Japan, engines from Vietnam, and electronics from China would see its costs skyrocket. Should they switch suppliers, move production, or simply pay the price? The government said this new system would level the playing field. American companies, it claimed, have been losing for too long under bad trade deals. These new tariffs, they argued, would give American businesses a fair shot. But critics warned that the changes could backfire. If other countries responded with their own tariffs, it could spark a trade war, a cycle of retaliation that might damage economies on both sides. Still, the rules were in motion. The 10% baseline tariff would begin on April 5th, just after midnight. The reciprocal tariffs would follow a few days later on April 9th. There was little time to prepare. And so, a new chapter in global trade had begun, not with quiet diplomacy, but with a bold and risky economic experiment. Why governments use tariffs? In classrooms, news studios, and business meetings, one question echoed everywhere. Why would a country choose to make things more expensive? Why use tariffs at all? To answer that, we need to look at how governments think, not just about money, but about jobs, power, and fairness. One of the most common reasons for tariffs is protection. When a country feels its industries are in danger, maybe from cheaper goods flooding in from abroad, it may use tariffs to protect local businesses. Imagine a young American shoe company trying to compete with large factories overseas. If foreign shoes are cheaper, local businesses might struggle to survive. But if the government adds a tariff to imported shoes, the price goes up. That gives local companies a better chance. This is often called protecting infant industries. These are new or growing businesses that need time to become strong enough to compete on their own. Tariffs can also protect older industries that are losing ground. Factories that make steel, for example, might be closing because imported steel is cheaper. By adding a tariff, the government hopes to save jobs and keep production local. Another reason is revenue. Before income taxes existed, tariffs were one of the main ways governments collected money. Even today, the money from tariffs goes into public budgets and can be used to pay for schools, roads, hospitals, and more. But in recent years, tariffs have also become tools for changing behavior, both inside the country and around the world. Let's look at a trade deficit. That's when a country buys more than it sells to other countries. The U.S., for example, imports billions of dollars worth of goods from other nations, but exports much less in return. A deficit like that can worry economists and leaders. They fear the country is becoming too dependent on others. By making imported goods more expensive, a government hopes people will buy more local products. That means more sales for local companies and fewer dollars sent overseas. Then there's negotiation. Sometimes, a government uses tariffs as leverage, a way to push other countries to change their trade rules. If one country has high taxes on your goods, you might respond by adding high taxes on theirs. This pressure can lead to talks, deals, or even new trade agreements. This idea of fair trade is where reciprocal tariffs come in. If another country is taxing your cars at 25% and you're not taxing theirs at all, some leaders argue that's not fair. So, you match their taxes with your own. It's like saying, we'll treat you the same way you treat us. Supporters of this strategy say it forces other nations to play by the rules. It gives your country power in a world of competition. But there's always risk. If you raise tariffs, the other country might do the same. That can lead to retaliation, trade wars, and rising prices for everyone. Still, for many governments, tariffs are an attractive option. They're easy to explain. They sound strong and protective. And they offer a promise: more local jobs, stronger industries, and a better balance in trade. The truth, though, is more complicated. Tariffs are not magic. They don't always work the way people hope. And their effects on prices, jobs, and relationships can be hard to control. But now, the U.S. had chosen this path. The world was watching closely. Would tariffs bring a wave of new factories and stronger industries? Or would they create more problems than they solved? Only time would tell. Reactions across the world. The announcement of the new tariffs spread across the globe like wildfire. News outlets in Asia, Europe, and the Americas raced to explain what had just happened. Inside trading floors in New York, Tokyo, London, and Frankfurt, the mood shifted from cautious interest to growing alarm. At first, some investors thought the changes might be minor. Maybe the U.S. was just sending a strong message, not taking drastic action. But as more details emerged, the 10% baseline, the huge 34% and 46% reciprocal tariffs, confidence began to crack. By the end of the day, the stock market had taken a hit. Big indexes like the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ fell sharply. Shares in car companies, tech giants, and retailers dropped the most. These were industries that relied heavily on global supply chains. And now, many of their imported parts and products were suddenly more expensive. One surprising effect? The price of gold jumped. Gold is often seen as a safe place to put money when things feel unstable. That simple rise said a lot. People were nervous. And it wasn't just investors. Business owners across the United States were filled with questions. What would this mean for their costs? Would they have to raise prices? Should they stop ordering from certain countries? Or worse, should they cancel expansion plans and hold off on hiring new workers? "I don't know what to do," said one small business owner in Michigan who imported furniture from Vietnam. "If prices go up 46%, I either lose money or lose customers." Foreign governments responded quickly. Canada and Mexico were relieved to learn they were exempt. Leaders there expressed cautious optimism, but still warned that they would watch closely, especially for any new tariffs on specific goods like cars or steel. But the mood was very different in Asia and Europe. China strongly opposed the new rates and called the move deeply unfair. Vietnam, surprised by the high 46% rate, said it would seek immediate talks. Japan and countries in the European Union signaled disappointment and frustration. Some officials in these countries worried that if they did nothing, it would look weak. Others urged caution, warning that reacting too fast could make things worse. Behind closed doors, trade experts debated next steps. Should they create their own tariffs on American goods? Should they take the U.S. to court at the World Trade Organization? Or should they try to negotiate before the higher tariffs began on April 9th? At the same time, economists around the world started weighing the broader impact. Would this lead to inflation? If prices for imported materials and everyday items rose, would consumers stop spending? Could this drag down the whole economy? Some said yes. Others said no. Even the U.S. Federal Reserve, the central bank responsible for guiding the country's financial health, was paying close attention. They didn't want to make sudden moves with interest rates while the economy faced such new uncertainty. The world was entering a new phase, one where trade was no longer quiet and technical, but loud, emotional, and unpredictable. And everyone, from factory workers to presidents, had a brace for what might come next. Business challenges began. As the news sank in, companies across the United States and around the world began to grasp what the new tariffs would mean for them. The effects weren't theoretical anymore. They were real, immediate, and in some cases frightening. For most businesses, the biggest challenge was simple: higher costs. Whether it was a large car manufacturer, a small clothing shop, or a high-tech electronics company, Many depended on imports, either to sell finished goods or to source the parts and materials they needed to make their products. Let's take a car factory as an example. A car might be assembled in Ohio, but its parts come from all over. Steel from Japan, engines from Germany, electronic components from China, and upholstery from Vietnam. Suddenly, each of those items could cost 10%, 34%, or even 46% more than before. A car that once cost $25,000 to produce could now cost $28,000 or more. That price hike might be passed to customers or absorbed by the company, shrinking profits. Neither option was attractive. Technology companies also felt the heat. Devices like smartphones and laptops rely heavily on Asian suppliers for chips, screens, and batteries. With tariffs on countries like Vietnam and China, many companies faced painful decisions. Should they raise prices? Should they slow down production? Or should they start looking for new suppliers, even if it meant starting over? But switching suppliers isn't simple. It takes months or years to build relationships, test products, and ensure quality. Changing a global supply chain is like trying to turn a giant ship. It can't be done quickly or easily. For some, another option was to move production back to the United States, a process known as reshoring. That sounds patriotic and hopeful, but in reality, it's expensive and time-consuming. Building new factories, hiring workers, and restarting local production lines can cost millions. And with so much uncertainty, many companies were afraid to invest. One furniture company in North Carolina tried reshoring a portion of its production. "We moved some assembly back," the owner explained, "but we still need parts from Asia. We just can't replace everything overnight." Retailers also felt the squeeze. Stores that sold imported clothing, toys, and home goods now had to decide how much of the new cost to pass on to customers. Raise prices too much, and customers might stop buying. Keep prices the same, and profits disappear. And then there were the small businesses, the cafes that imported coffee beans, the online stores that sold foreign crafts, the independent electronic shops that relied on international inventory. Many had no financial cushion. A 10% increase in costs could be a breaking point. One small business owner, who sold handmade bags imported from Vietnam, put it simply, "We're stuck. We either pay more or shut down." Beyond the numbers, there was a deeper issue: uncertainty. Nobody knew how long the tariffs would last. Would they increase even more? Would new countries be added to the list? Would other countries retaliate, creating new obstacles for companies trying to export? All this made it incredibly hard to plan. Should a company open a new store, build a new warehouse, hire new employees? For many, the answer was wait and see, and waiting can be dangerous. If too many businesses stop investing, growth slows. Job creation freezes. Innovation stalls. This was the reality businesses were now facing. A new world shaped by changing trade rules, political decisions, and global tensions. For some, it was a chance to compete. For others, it was a storm they might not survive. Impact on everyday people. As companies adjusted their plans and markets reacted to the new trade rules, the changes started reaching the people who had nothing to do with politics or international deals, everyday consumers. At first, the effects were subtle. A small increase in the price of electronics, a slightly higher bill at the grocery store. But over time, shoppers began to feel a growing pressure on their wallets. This is how tariffs often work. When businesses pay more for imported goods, they often pass the cost to customers. A 10% increase on imported food, clothing, or tools doesn't stay behind warehouse doors. It shows up in price tags. For example, a family shopping for school supplies might find that backpacks, pencil cases, and laptops are suddenly more expensive. A young couple trying to furnish their first apartment might discover the couch they wanted now costs $100 more than it did last month. And it's not just one product. It's many: electronics, cars, furniture, toys, even building materials. These are things people buy every day, and when prices go up across the board, it adds up. This can lead to a larger problem called inflation. When the general price level of goods and services rises and money buys less than it used to, people feel poorer, even if their income stays the same. Some worry about jobs too. The government hoped that by making imported goods more expensive, local businesses would grow and hire more workers. In some places, this could happen, especially in manufacturing or agriculture. But it's not always that simple. If companies can't afford rising material costs, they might cut spending elsewhere. That could mean freezing hiring, canceling bonuses, or even laying off workers. A factory facing a 34% increase in imported machine parts might not survive without major changes. People working in industries that rely on imports, retail, logistics, small manufacturing, could find their jobs at risk. And then there's the emotional toll. When people don't feel secure about the future, they become cautious. Surveys showed that many Americans were worried about rising prices, job stability, and the overall direction of the economy. In uncertain times, families tend to spend less and save more. That sounds responsible, but if millions of people cut back on spending at once, it can slow the entire economy. Fewer purchases mean lower sales, which can lead to fewer jobs, which leads to even less spending, a difficult cycle. There is also a fairness question. Low-income families often spend a large portion of their income on essential goods. If those goods go up in price, it hits them harder than wealthier households. A 10% increase on food or children's clothes might not matter to some, but for others, it could mean tough choices, fewer groceries, delayed rent, or skipping school supplies. Not everyone agreed on the impact. Some people believe the tariffs were necessary and worth the short-term pain. It's about time we protected our own industries, one factory worker said. We've been losing jobs to cheap imports for too long. Others felt the pain wasn't fair. We're not a big company, said a mother shopping for her kids, but we're the ones paying more every week. How is this helping us? In the end, whether the tariffs would protect jobs or hurt households was still unclear. But what was certain was this: the effect had already reached millions of people. And for many of them, life was starting to feel more expensive and more uncertain. What's next? With the rules now public, businesses, governments, and ordinary people all turn to one urgent question: what happens next? The timeline was already set. The 10% baseline tariff would start at midnight on April 5th. Just 4 days later, on April 9th, the reciprocal tariffs would kick in, targeting countries like China, Vietnam, and others with significantly higher rates. The government made it clear, these tariffs were not just symbolic. They were real, they were starting soon, and they would remain in place until the trade situation was fair. But what did fair mean? And who would decide? Some officials hinted that the tariffs weren't permanent. In fact, they were described as starting points for discussion. If foreign governments agreed to lower their own tariffs on American goods, the U.S. might lower its new taxes in return. This opened the door to negotiation. For example, if China reduced its taxes on American cars or electronics, the U.S. might agree to bring its 34% tariff down. The same could be true for Vietnam's 46% rate. However, there was a big catch. Would these talks begin before the tariffs took effect? Most experts thought that was unlikely, and that meant businesses would have to absorb the pain first, while hoping for relief later. Meanwhile, another major risk was growing: retaliation. In international trade, when one country raises tariffs, the other often responds by doing the same. This back and forth is known as a trade war, and it can escalate quickly. If China or the European Union imposed new taxes on American goods in response, companies in the U.S. that export products like farmers, automakers, or tech firms could face major losses. One farmer in Iowa put it simply, if they tax our soybeans, we lose a huge market. That's our livelihood. The possibility of retaliation added more uncertainty. Would trade relationships break down? Would prices rise even more? Would more jobs be lost? But not all countries were treated equally. Canada and Mexico, as part of the USMCA trade agreement, were spared the new 10% baseline and reciprocal tariffs. Their exemption showed that existing trade deals still mattered. It also offered a possible path forward for others. Negotiate a new deal, and you might avoid the harshest taxes. Still, many countries were in a difficult position. If they changed their trade rules too quickly, they might seem weak. But if they didn't act at all, they risked long-term damage to their exports. For now, all eyes were on April 5th and April 9th. Would companies raise prices immediately? Would other countries respond with new taxes? Would the U.S. economy feel the impact right away, or would the effects build slowly over months? Nobody knew for sure. The next chapter of the story depended on choices by leaders in government, CEOs in boardrooms, and families in shopping aisles. The tariffs were real. The consequences were beginning. And the future? It was still unwritten. Trade in a changing world. As the dust settled from the announcements, one thing was clear. The world of trade had entered a new era. For decades, trade between countries had grown faster and more connected. Goods made in one country were sold in another, often passing through multiple nations before reaching a shelf or customer. This global network had become the backbone of the modern economy. Now, that network faced new rules and new risks. The 10% baseline tariff was just the beginning. Countries like China faced a 34% total tariff, while Vietnam faced a massive 46%. Other trading partners, including Japan and the European Union, had their own concerns about higher rates. Only Canada and Mexico were exempt, protected by the USMCA. Their experience showed that special agreements still had power, even in a world shifting toward more aggressive trade tactics. Across industries, the impact varied. Large corporations struggled with supply chain disruptions. Small businesses worried about survival, and consumers braced for higher prices. But deeper than the numbers was a sense of uncertainty. Would this last forever? Would other countries strike back with their own tariffs? Would businesses stop hiring or investing? Some experts warned of inflation, that the new rules would make everything more expensive, from food to phones. Others worried about job losses, especially in sectors that depended on imports or exports. Meanwhile, leaders around the world were divided. Some supported the U.S. approach, saying it was time to demand fairness. Others feared it would cause a chain reaction of protectionism, where countries focused more on guarding their own markets than cooperating globally. The word trade war began appearing in headlines, on talk shows, and in classrooms. It wasn't a war with weapons, but one with tariffs, taxes, and tough words. And like any war, it carried risks for economies, for jobs, and for international peace. Still, some believe this bold move could bring change. If it led to new deals, fairer rules, and stronger local industries, maybe the short-term pain would be worth it. Others strongly disagreed. They saw it as a step backward, a return to economic walls in a world that had worked hard to build bridges. In the end, one truth remained. Trade is complicated. It's more than just money. It's about relationships, power, fairness, and survival. And now, more than ever, it's about choices. Will the world move toward cooperation or confrontation? Will countries open their markets or close them? Will people benefit or pay the price? These questions didn't have easy answers. But one thing was certain. The rules had changed, and the story of global trade would never be the same again. And that brings us to the end of today's story. We've learned about tariffs, trade wars, and how changes in global policy can touch every part of our lives, from the price of a backpack to the future of a factory. We hope this story helped you understand not just English vocabulary and grammar, but also real-world issues that affect people everywhere. If you found this story helpful, please leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Do you agree with using tariffs to protect local industries? Or do you think they cause more harm than good? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story with your friends. That way, you'll never miss a new video, and you'll help support even more English learning content just like this. Thanks for spending your time with us. Have a wonderful day, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next story. Take care. Books vocabulary list. Tariff noun. A tax on goods brought into a country. Example. The U.S. government added a new tariff on imported cars. Import. Verb. To bring goods into a country to sell. Example. The company imports electronics from South Korea. Export. Verb. To send goods to another country to sell. Example. Farmers export soybeans to several Asian countries. Policy, noun. A set of rules or a plan of action by government. Example. The trade policy changed how companies buy materials. Trade, noun. The buying and selling of goods and services. Example. Trade between countries helps the global economy grow. Economy, noun. The system of how money is made and used in a country. Example. The economy slowed down after the new tariffs were introduced. Revenue, noun. Money collected by a government or business. Example. Tariffs help increase government revenue. Deficit, noun. The amount by which spending is more than income. Example. The country has a large trade deficit with other nations. Industry, noun. A group of businesses that produce similar products. Example. The steel industry supports thousands of jobs. Inflation, noun. A rise in prices that makes money less valuable. Example. People worry that tariffs might cause inflation. Supply chain, noun. The steps a product takes from creation to sale. Example. Tariffs disrupted the company's global supply chain. Baseline, adjective. A starting point used for comparison. Example. The new baseline tariff is 10% on all imports. Reciprocal, adjective. Done in return, responding to someone's action. Example. The U.S. used reciprocal tariffs to match other countries' taxes. Protection, noun. The act of keeping something safe from harm. Example. Tariffs are sometimes used for economic protection. Agreement, noun. A deal or understanding between people or groups. Example. The USMCA is a trade agreement between 3 countries. Exempt, adjective. Not required to follow a rule or pay a tax. Example. Canada is exempt from the new tariffs. Market, noun. A place or system for buying and selling goods. Example. Stock markets reacted to the trade announcement. Retaliation, noun. An action taken in response to harm or offense. Example. Other countries warned they might use retaliation. Consumer, noun. A person who buys goods or services. Example. Consumers saw prices go up after the tariff started. Uncertainty, noun. A lack of knowing what will happen next. Example. There is a lot of uncertainty in the business world.